Hello, Dog fans. Welcome to DawgDial. I'm Josh Mendlinger, your host, along with my partner, Joel Taco Thompson, here today at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia, on Highway 92. Glad you can join us. We are here to talk during the Bulldog bye week, or the work week, according to Coach Kirby Smart. And we are going to talk about several things, including about what Dogs did over the bye week, around the SEC, what's going on, and what's going on around the nation with the top schools and the top teams. We're going to talk about recruiting, injury updates, as well as have some question and answers that have been period where you folks out in Facebook Live world, as well as DawgDial Nation, have called in or dialed in or written in and sent us some questions that we are going to answer here on our show today. We'll also be talking about the next opponent, Taco, the Gators. What do you think about them?
The Florida Gators down to Jacksonville, a good rivalry. Both teams have a bye week, of course, leading up to this game, notably so. A lot of things have happened with implications in the SEC East during this week in the season. So it'll be a big game for the Dogs in Jacksonville.
No doubt. Absolutely true. This is always a big game. It's always the big rivalry for Georgia as far as in the SEC East. And I think that this is going to be a great game, as we can expect that the Florida Gators are going to bring everything they got. And we'll get into that a little bit later on our show here on DawgDial. If you'd like to join us, you can write in, and any questions or comments that you have on our Facebook page at DawgDial, you can certainly do that. We are broadcasting on a network of radio stations, as I said, and also on Facebook Live from Buffalo's Cafe here in Woodstock. We'll be right back, and we're going to get right into the bye week and what's going on with the Georgia Bulldogs today. Stick with us on DawgDial. Go Dogs. Get right back to it. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm Josh Mendlinger, your host, with my partner Taco Thompson. Taco, this was the bye week for the Georgia Bulldogs as well as the Gators, but the Georgia Bulldogs had the week off from playing. However, according to Coach Kirby Smart, as we heard last week during his press conferences, this is not an off week. This is not a bye week. This is a work week still.
Yeah, and it's worked out in favor for a big game, obviously, coming up with the Gators, which we'll get into in depth in the show later. The Gator game in Jacksonville, neutral site, has had implications for the SEC for a long time. But it's good to have a bye week, get some guys healed up, and work on some of the fundamentals. There were some things in the game, the previous game, that I think needs some attention. Sure. And so that has to happen. The other things that happen in a bye week is other people play football.
That is true.
And
well, what was going on around the SEC and around the nation that the Georgia Bulldog Nation needs to know about? And
well, everybody wants to hear about Bama. I mean, it was a nail biter in Tuscaloosa Saturday night.
It was a nail biter for who? For their mascot?
I think for Smokey.
Smokey was
volunteer.
That's about the only thing he could keep himself busy with.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Tennessee came into Alabama, and again, poor Butch Jones just can't catch a break. 45-7 was the thrashing down in Tuscaloosa. Another good game was LSU Ole Miss. Again, LSU. Coach Orgeron may have the LSU Tigers back on track. They 40-24 beating Ole Miss. The surprise of the weekend, I thought, in my eyes, in the SEC, was Mississippi State really putting it on Kentucky.
They sure did.
You know, another future opponent coming up for the Dogs, and maybe thought Kentucky was right there in the middle of the pack in the SEC, and thought maybe they might have enough in the tank to give Georgia a little bit of trouble. But boy, Mississippi State handled them pretty well.
They sure did. What about the LSU as well? What about that game?
LSU, Ole Miss again. They, Ole Miss still a young team fighting it, and LSU may have found some rhythm here mid-season. So they put it on Ole Miss, and then you go round out the other SEC. You got Auburn beat up on Arkansas, another opponent that Georgia needs to be looking at. A lot of folks are thinking Auburn has something to throw at Georgia, and they certainly are. They're still in the top 25 rankings. That's a threatening game looming. Auburn number 19, and they really put it on Arkansas, putting up 52 points. Anytime you can put up 52 on anybody in the SEC, that's pretty good work.
That is, I agree. I think, as we know, the SEC has that ability to basically chew itself up as far as when it comes to the rankings by beating each other. And you never know, going week to week, who is going to step up and take out another top team.
And looking around, the implications is Georgia wasn't off in the power rankings. What happened is a couple of things happened that I think will affect Georgia, and we are coming up, a week from now. The first college football playoff rankings come out.
You're right.
And so October the 31st, we'll be looking at that. But interestingly enough, I think everybody in Georgia land was watching the Penn State versus Michigan game, hoping that a Michigan team could knock off the Penn State Nittany Lions, but Penn State, ranked number 2, looked punishing against Michigan. I don't know if Michigan's that bad or if Penn State is that good. Really hard to tell.
I agree with you on that. They did show up, and they did not take it easy on them.
Yeah, James Franklin, formerly an SEC coach, goes up to Penn State and really steadies that program up. So that's a good one. If you look, though, what happened, I looked at the rankings. In most rankings, most polls, Georgia's still number 3. But in the power rankings, interestingly enough, put out by our favorite 4-letter network,
yes,
it had TCU with a thrashing, beat up on their opponent this week. I forgot who that was, but right. TCU moved up ahead of Georgia in the power rankings and rounding out the top 5, Clemson.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's, the power rankings are important, especially going into the decision-making by the committee that's going to decide the playoff Final Four. And Georgia, as good as they're playing, obviously they're relying on the defense. The offense, if you look at some of their numbers, they were ranked after this 224th in passing as far as their grade as average per game. Their rushing was 14th, so that wasn't so bad in the nation as far as their points per game or yardage per game, yards for scrimmage. And their total yard for scrimmage is ranking 57th. So not exactly the numbers you would think a top 4, top 5 team should have, but they are still showing up with great wins, I should say, against the key people at this point.
Scored a lot of points.
They have.
And, it looks like to me, and we'll have to run the stats on this, but it looks like a lot of points are being scored in college football now. It's not unusual to see those 40 and 50 score points, and that's putting up a lot of offense. So, and you didn't mention the rankings on defense. I'm sure Georgia's still at number 2 and number 3
and
on the rankings.
That's where they are holding steady, and that's where many people are saying, in the past, defense wins championships. You definitely have to be able to put up points in order to win in this type of atmosphere with the bowl games, because the other teams such as Bama or Auburn can put up points, and if you can't reciprocate, you're in trouble.
Yep. Well, and we saw one other game that is showing implications here for Georgia this weekend. If you watch the Notre Dame versus USC, I mean, the Pac-10 has really taken a beating, and Notre Dame delivered the latest blow. That's obviously important to fans of Georgia, since Georgia went up and beat Notre Dame by a point in South Bend. But that win looks better and better the longer the season goes on. Notre Dame with that victory of 49-14 over USC moved them into the top 10. So they're in number 9 in most of the polls in terms of rankings.
So absolutely. At the beginning of right after that game, everyone thought that Notre Dame win was going to be not that meaningful.
Right.
People thought out there that Notre Dame was going to be nothing. They were going to fold this year, but look what they've done. They've recouped. They've gathered themselves and pulled themselves up by the bootstraps.
Well, Wimbush, it shows you how good maybe the Georgia defense was in containing Wimbush. The guy, the dual threat quarterback of Notre Dame, is really carrying them through. So, hey, give that Georgia defense another little nod. But all things considered, Georgia's still hanging in there in bye week, and not really a whole lot of shakeups this weekend. And so Georgia will be in good shape, I think, headed to Florida. We'll get into the injury stuff a little bit later, maybe be healthy.
Yeah, well, it looks now, Georgia 4-0 in the SEC, 7-0 overall. The next close two are tied with South Carolina and Florida at 3-2 each. And those are, you would have to say, are the ones that we have to look out for in the East. Obviously, we're hoping that there won't be a significant drop with those coming up with those opponents. We can't expect that the Georgia Bulldogs will let up. We can't expect that Kirby Smart will let that happen. However, we got to be careful. Again, it is the SEC, and anything's possible on any given Saturday.
Yep, 4 more SEC games, and if you look at the slate, Florida, South Carolina, Auburn, Kentucky, and then we've got Georgia Tech to end up the regular season. There's still a lot of football to be played.
Absolutely.
And 4 SEC games, 2 of those are in Athens, 3 of those are away, come to Atlanta to play Tech at the end of the year, which doesn't have SEC implications, but a lot of things could still happen. So the season is still not sold. It's still not sewn up in the SEC East for the Dogs.
Oh, absolutely. I tell you what, let's take a quick break. We'll come right back. We'll talk about the any other national football business that we have. But look, we're going to get into recruiting and some of the commits for next year and talk about that a little bit. And then we'll get into some injury updates and things like that for the Georgia Bulldogs going into this during what's going on during this off week for them. So stick with us on DawgDial. We'll be right back. Okay. Well, we'll get into the Justin Fields talk.
Yep.
All right, we are back here on DawgDial. Welcome back. And this, I guess you could say, it's the bye week for the Bulldogs, but still there's plenty of talk to be done We've covered a little bit about the SEC and the national rankings that are going on and where the Dogs stand in the national ranking as of right now. But let's chat a little bit about next year. Might as well. We got a few moments to talk about some recruits that are coming in and the status of some of those recruits and what's going on, so we can look towards the future. Obviously, we don't want to look past this season, Taco, but good things are on the horizon, or continued good things are on the horizon for the Bulldog Nation, especially with the top quarterback coming to the Bulldogs up in Athens. However,
you got to visit. Get to the chopper.
Yeah,
you know the get to the chopper.
Yeah, I do know the little commando reference, right?
Little Arnold action. Yeah. Well, Kirby brought the chopper.
Yeah.
To the showdown with Harrison and Dalton over the weekend, and you saw that. Back up before we get into that. The important thing during a season, which a lot of people realize who follow Georgia Bulldogs closely, that recruiting happens a lot in the season. So these coaches on Friday take off right after practice.
Yes.
And they're watching high school football.
Sure thing.
And going to see these kids. And in fact, and they're traveling. A lot of the coaches, you don't see or hear much about it, but the position coaches are usually taking off, sometimes during the week, sometimes on Thursday, Friday, to travel to places to see these kids and meet with them and talk with coaches. And you get a lot of times you got to put your eyeballs in these players. The tape is the tape, but, coaches want to see the eyeballs, and there's just no better way to do it than to be there. But that said, Coach Smart did show up at the game to see Mr. Fields play, and what a tragic accident that happened is he broke that throwing finger on his right hand, so pretty gruesome.
Finger, I believe, yes. From what I've heard and seen, it is pretty gruesome. It happens, and he will have surgery on it, and he is done for the season. From what all reports have said, it's unfortunate. However, you know what? It's okay. It's part of the game. Injuries happen at all levels, and you know what? It is an injury he can recover from. It shouldn't affect his dual threat all that much because it's
not related to the wheels. So,
yeah, exactly. So that's important.
Finger is good. Nonetheless, he's still going to be able to throw the football. You had mentioned, too, good news recently out of Athens was the pickup of Adam Anderson, the outside linebacker prospect out of Rome, who is probably the second highest profile get for the Bulldogs. So Anderson has an interesting little story, and I'll give a shout out to Dog Nation, did a pretty good profile on this, is that he this season too had a huge night. He and Georgia recruit Justin Fields had a game against each other. Both had great games in the season, and Anderson actually had 3.5 sacks. But the interesting story, these are still kids, and Anderson was a one-time LSU commit. His second commit was Georgia.
Okay, so
then he was Georgia to Alabama, and so now he's committed to Georgia. So let's get some ink on paper here as quick as we can with some of these
November
kids.
Can't come fast enough. Signing day cannot be here any faster for Kirby Smart. He certainly is doing his best that he can to make sure that the Georgia Bulldogs stay in that top of the charts, so that's what the recruits want to see. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear about their possible school being on TV, the media, all the hype. All that is what any time that's what recruits have wanted to hear, but especially today with all the media coverage, that's what these recruits want to lock into and know that they're going to have a chance to be seen being played on a national audience.
Yeah, and it looks like, so far Georgia has 17. I know last year's class, they had 25 signees, and normally it's about that number. You have some moving around and some redshirting, some walking on, some players leave, etc. So far, 17 commitments, verbal commitments, and like you said, it's always good to get them signed on the bottom line, but recruiting is critical, and you see Georgia. I see a lot of defensive personnel?
I do. There's some defensive tackles. Devontae Wyatt out of Kansas. So not even just some Georgia commits. So, 300-pound defensive tackle coming in. Of course, a couple of big offensive linemen as well, which is obviously important to keep that line
Absolutely
steady and bringing in some big-time hosses to work that line and cover the line and protect the quarterback.
Yeah, so far it looks like most, what Georgia does its recruiting. Obviously, you recruit in your home backyard, but Georgia does go to Florida a pretty good bit. A couple of athletes, Elijah Moore, wide receiver out of Fort Lauderdale.
Certainly.
Wild Goose, that'll be a good name for radio next year. From Northwestern High School in Miami, Florida. Mostly the others in Florida. I see a kid here, Owen Condon from Oklahoma City, so there must be a tie or a contact there. Brule from Archbishop Rummel High School in Metairie, Louisiana, and another Virginia Beach commitment defensive end, Javon Beckton, out of Ocean Lakes, Virginia Beach.
Yes.
So the Dawgs are spreading their wings.
They are. Also, there was Zamir White out of North Carolina, the running back, a 5-star commit. So another running back for the stables for Kirby Smart and his offense. And that can only help the Bulldogs shore up that backfield because, as we know, anything is possible in today's game, and injuries happen. And obviously we know they're loaded, but it's always good to have that backup.
Their injuries are part of it. I think Coach Smart in leading the Georgia Bulldogs, as well as anybody having played in the SEC or coached in the SEC and played, but your recruiting adds to your depth. We've seen the need for the Bulldogs this year to have depth, especially at the defensive line. We had a suspension at linebacker, so there are a couple of freshmen that were recruited on this 2017 recruiting list, Jake Fromm being one of them, that are already on the field playing a predominant role. DeAndre Swift is another one from the 2017 class. So there are freshmen playing, and some of the names that we're talking about very well see action for the Bulldogs in the next season, in 2018.
That is for certain. You can only imagine that, next year we had those running backs that came back for their senior year. And now they're going to be gone. We know that for a fact. They can't come back. They can't play anymore because they're seniors, and they're moving on. They have some linemen and some other folks that are literally just moving on, not whether or not they're going to the NFL or where they're going. They are done with eligibility. So it is important that we keep that we see the Bulldogs having a good recruiting class. I believe in the SEC, they're ranked number 2. Obviously, you could think who's number 1 in recruiting classes. I believe it came in as Bama, but and number 7 nationally as far as the rankings with their recruiting class.
I think Georgia and Alabama are going to compete for the recruits. Alabama's going to have the home turf in Alabama, but a lot of schools come here to Georgia. I think Georgia's number 2 in total talent on Division I power rosters. So the Metro Atlanta area and even surrounding areas, Metro Atlanta expands, but you'll find every coach in Division I football at some point in time is coming here to Atlanta,
certainly,
to look at football players.
Well, if they do come here to Atlanta, we would have to recommend them coming by and dropping by a Buffalo's and getting some wings, getting some of the Buffalo's hot wings, and checking out some of the other food. Great place to come eat. Bring your family. We're at the Buffalo's in Woodstock on Highway 92. Great servers and staff here. And they recommend anybody come on by and check them out. They have some good wing specials during the week and a few other specials for kids and beverages. Bash night. I love that. Bash night. All you can eat wings. It's a great thing here at the Buffalo's that were here in Woodstock. But however, it's at all the Buffalo's. They can catch that at any of their locations around the greater Atlanta area. I would certainly say those recruits need to check it out, as well as anyone visiting.
Recruit some wingman.
Right,
recruit a wingman.
Recruit your wingman or a Buffalo wingman. Absolutely, that's what we're looking for. And we looked out to our Buffalo Cafe wingman, and we have some questions and answers period that we're going to be coming to a little bit later in the show after we do some injury updates. But our recruiting class, just to kind of wrap that up, how do you feel, Taco, as far as your just overall grading, I should say, because we've been giving grades out to the Bulldogs all over the season, or as the season has gone by. What would you say is the grade that you would give them?
Well, I know that Coach Smart is known as a very good recruiter. He understands what it takes. So I'd have to give Georgia a solid A in the category. For me, recruiting, everybody talks about the stars and, oh, you got a 5-star. Well, there aren't many 5 stars. So, what is the difference in that 4-star and the 3-star? And you hear the coaches always talk about, well, you can have the greatest athlete in the world. Look at where Jacob Eason is. I mean, he was a highly touted 5-star. Things can change in a matter of months in college football with injuries and things that happen. There are interesting things. If you see on this recruiting list, people talk about an athlete. Well, he's an athlete being recruited as an athlete. The question then becomes, what does the coaching staff do? Where do they put that kid? Do they have him put in the right spot? Right. You see a lot of quarterbacks in high school level go into college, become talented receivers. You see them become quarterbacks. Defensive linemen, offensive linemen swap up. You see running backs shifting from running back to maybe a linebacker position. When they get into college, they tend to put on some weight.
Right, beef up and
hey, the guy, the running back position may have a full stable. So what are you going to do? Would you want to be, if I'm a kid playing 18, I want to get on
time, right? I want to
get on that field.
No doubt.
So, and a lot of these freshmen will redshirt, so it's always a good thing. But a lot of them, again, will be pressed into the 2-deep role and play a role on special teams. And so, but so far, I have to give Georgia and Coach Smart an A, a good solid A for doing the recruiting. And I've seen a couple who've been leaning towards the Alabama-Georgia decision. So we'd like to win some of those battles in the recruiting game.
I think that would help towards the end of the year. It can be amazing. I think the recruiting battle or fight that will happen if it comes down to the SEC championship game in Atlanta between Alabama and Georgia. What side of the field do you go to as a 5-star recruit or a top recruit? Do you take the invite from Alabama or do you take the invite from the Bulldogs? And I can imagine that a coach would not take too kindly if you're on the other side of the field if he's heavily recruiting you. So that will be an interesting couple of scenarios to play out if we get to that point for the Bulldogs. So we'll definitely have to look forward to that, folks, here on Bulldog Nation. We'll be right back on DawgDial. Stick with us. We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back to talk about the injury updates and then get into our question and answers and talk about, of course, that Gator game, the Swamp Thing, going against those swamp critters down in Jacksonville. So we'll be right back. Stick with us on DawgDial. Check 1, 2. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. We are live at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. Sorry we had a little technical difficulty there. Had to just switch out headsets. That's what happens as part of these live remotes. Taco, just want to mention to you folks that our flagship radio station is Real Country Q 92.3 WMOQ FM in Athens, Monroe. For a podcast of today's show or any of the nearly 200 and almost 30 episodes, or 250 to 300 episodes of DawgDial, simply go to iTunes and search for DawgDial on the podcast section. You can email us at, or you can reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter. Our email, georgia@crmsports.com. Our Twitter handle, @DawgDial. And, of course, on Facebook Live, you feel free to write in anytime, and we'll be able to respond to you as we're going along. So, Taco, injuries. Where are we at here with the Bulldogs as far as key injuries?
Well, I think we're healing. So, two key highlight injuries that were Trent Thompson, who had an MCL, and he's been out for the last couple of games. And also, Godwin was out with the knee injury. The report was this week that both were out on the practice field, not in full pads. It was non-padded practice, but both are out. And I think Eason, after having been on the sidelines for 3 or 4 weeks, that his wheels are back to normal. So in the event that you did have to go to a number 2, that Eason would be willing, ready, and able to go in a backup spot.
I might say capable as well.
Capable, yeah. So the 2 deep is good. So injuries are part of it. You had Marshall and Hawkins Muckle, I think, were other injuries that were on the list. But a bye week helps a lot. The good thing for the Bulldogs this season is no season ending or no serious injuries have taken place for the Bulldogs in key spots. So, boy, that's through 8 games, that's a good omen there.
That is. I would agree with you on that entirely. I know there were a few others out there. I believe it was, did you mention David Marshall? Reggie Carter was banged up a little bit.
Yep.
So these are the elements that the defense had taken a pretty strong hit. Defensive line in the linebackers as well.
Parrish had an injury, and now he's back. He's trying to break back into that starting lineup, but he's been in situations in the nickel and dime. But an injury with him out, next man up stepped up, so he's on the field a lot.
Sure. Well, the good news is that they have a few more days of treatments and rest and get stretching and just getting their ducks in a row and getting those aches and pains back to a controllable level. Obviously, at this level of football, as you know, having played at a high level of football in college, that you're never really playing pain-free. You're just not playing injury-free, but not pain-free.
The treatments are good. The training is good in this day and age, and that's a big part of the game. So they put a lot of resources in there for these kids because they are playing at a high level game, and there's a lot of good treatment for these athletes, a lot of skilled people around it. There's always good trainers. Georgia has a great staff.
Yes.
There's team physician. There's any number of medical disciplines around the team that the trainers and physician staff can access. So there's a lot of good medical assistance.
Absolutely. And if I I know we have a few moments, but quick shout out to, speaking of those medical assistants, the Roswell EMT. If I didn't get to mention this to you, but on Saturday night's game with my son, about 8th grade in Alpharetta for the Raiders, playing against Pope, 8th grade team. There was an injury. It was a possible neck injury from a tackle on a kickoff or a kick return, and one of the Pope players went down. His nickname is Chewy, so I'd like to give a shout-out to Chewy because he's actually doing well. Went to the hospital. The EMTs put him on the backboard, got him in the ambulance, off on his way. He left that night, was checked out with no significant injuries. We're super glad to hear that. So best wishes to Chewy and hopefully getting back to the season that starts the playoffs for Pope next week as well. So just wanted to give a quick shout out and a great job to the EMTs in Roswell that took care of that, and the Alpharetta ambulance staff and fire crew that came out. So I just
and they're at every game. You don't see them. It's kind of an unsung deal, but there are emergency personnel and trained staff on the field, near the field at every game. And knock on wood, we haven't seen that happen.
Right, you're a little familiar with that yourself, so we can get into that another time. But you definitely are aware of that with your playing days. But let's get into some couple of quick questions before we get too far along here. We had a couple questions sent in to us, and I'm going to throw them out to you. First, I guess this might take a while. This may cover everything, but we had a Bob Indicator, we'll say, said or asked, what will Eason do? What do you think now that obviously the starting position has been handed over to Fromm? What do you think Eason will do, if not after this season?
Yeah, we can talk about, and I'll get your opinion too. Is I think any kid in their right mind who's as highly talented as Jacob Eason wants to play on the field. I just don't see him standing on the sidelines for the next 3 years. I just don't see it. You've got another recruit who's a dual threat, different kind of quarterback in Fields who's going to come in. More than likely he's going to enroll early. If I'm Jacob Eason, I'm evaluating my options on a transfer. Sure. And I'm going to look for somewhere where there's a system that requires me to throw the football. And more likely than not, that's probably going to be somewhere on the West Coast, unless he decides to go and transfer with his former recruiting coach and former head coach of the Bulldogs, Mark Richt, in Miami. Right.
That is a possibility.
So,
I don't know if it's a possibility. I mean, I'm just saying that could be seen from him. And out West Coast, as you mentioned earlier before we got on air, Eason is a West Coast guy.
He's a Washington guy, so you've got Washington and Washington State throw the football around quite a bit. I don't know that Leach at Washington State is the best match. I don't know this, but it certainly would be to a benefit for Jacob Eason. He was touted as a future NFL star when he came into Georgia. Obviously, Georgia does produce. We talk about some of the Bulldogs in the NFL and what's happening, but there's one making a lot of money in Detroit who came through a Bulldogs uniform. So I just, as a former player, I just would want to spend my next 3 years, unless there's some underlying reason where Athens keeps him tied, then I think sit out a year and go back to playing major college football. The kid has a lot of talent.
He sure does, and certainly could help any program out there. He'd be starting in just about every program there possibly could ask him to come over. Okay, let's get a last quick question because we do have to move on. Just a quick one. With these running backs that we have, the two that are seniors are going to be moving on, Chubb, Michelle. This could be a whole show in and of itself, talking about the NFL draft. As long as they stay healthy, where do you think they go as far as spots in the draft?
Yeah, I haven't seen the draft boards, but obviously everybody out there, including Mel Kiper, likes to give give advice to kids, and I'm sure there's agents and everybody's hovering around here looking at where these two go. But I definitely think Chubb goes higher. I've seen him in the top 10. If you remember last year, LSU's Leonard Fournette and went high, and he's performing well in the NFL. And McCaffrey,
a little banged up right now, but yeah,
a little banged up. And then McCaffrey out of Stanford has not been as successful. But I do see Chubb as a top 10. As far as Sony Michel, certainly an NFL prospect, will be making NFL money, probably just more in maybe the second, third rounds, possibly.
Well, yeah, that's quite likely. We'll see how the rest of this year shapes up. Obviously, there's always going to be the question, which we won't get into today, of whether any of those guys should be on the Heisman watch as well. So we'll talk about that after maybe the Florida game and see how they perform there, because that's when the hype is really going to start. We're going to take a quick break right now on DawgDial. We'll be right back, and we're going to get into the Gator game, Georgia Bulldogs versus those Florida Gators down in Jacksonville. So stick with us on DawgDial. Go Dogs.
Let's do it.
All right.
Facebook fans.
Hi, how you doing, Facebook fans? And we are back on DawgDial. Thanks for joining with us. I am Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, talking all things Georgia Bulldogs during this Georgia's Bulldogs work week. Not a bye week, it's a work week.
Chopping wood week.
Chopping wood, lots getting it done. Hopefully the Bulldogs are getting it done as far as healing and preparatory work for the Florida Gator game coming up down in Jacksonville this week. Obviously, it's a big hyped game. It's an annual rivalry game between the two states, and it goes back a ways, doesn't it there, Taco?
First game?
How far back we talking?
We're going to 1915.
That's a long time ago.
1915. And there's actually some controversy. They've played every year since 1926. And maybe that was when they had helmets you could fold up and put in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Maybe the leather type. But it's also been in Jacksonville since 1933. It's one of the biggest events that Jacksonville has every year. So obviously what you get there is a common Jacksonville location. So it's split between the distance between Gainesville to Jacksonville, and you've got Athens to Jacksonville. So a good neutral site, and it should be a fantastic contest. Here's a little throwback for you, though. I think the SEC there at one point in time wanted to turn down the largest outdoor cocktail party version, but in 1950s.
Yes.
It was reported by Bill Castells.
Right.
We're talking about how the nickname comes about as the largest cocktail party. Well, Castells was a writer for one of the local newspapers, writing a sports story, and he witnessed a drunk fan hand offer a cocktail to a off-duty cop. So
that's not good.
There you go.
Too funny.
Henceforth, but ever since 2006, they wanted to remove the moniker for obvious reasons. But it's still a good time. It's going to be. It was announced it's a mid-afternoon game, so it's going to be a 3:30 game. And so the Bulldogs are headed to Jacksonville.
We got some Bulldogs fans here with us today. How you doing, folks? We are on the radio. I know we're talking radio. You can't see it, but we got some Georgia Bulldog fans. We got a little guy here. Go Dogs, right?
He's go Dogs early.
Yeah, he's all of. How old is the little guy here? How many months? Oh, she. In her Bulldog shirt. 18 months. All right. She's in her Bulldog jersey. She's ready for the I don't say for the cocktail party, but she's ready for the Bulldog game. Too much talk about that tailgating. So, too funny. But she's good to see you out here at Buffalo's. Thanks. Hopefully you had a great day. We'll catch you guys next week. Come on back. We'll see you here with DawgDial. Come join us again.
Put them on the radio.
We'll get them on the radio. Too funny. Well, they're fired up here at Buffalo's for that Gator game. It'd be a great place to come watch the game and be a great game time. Yeah, there we got one of our fans coming right on in. So checking out our studio set here. But
lights.
Yes.
We got a lot of fans. 80,000. I mean, thousands of fans coming to see our radio
absolutely.
And then we get them started early, though. We start them early at 18 months old.
They do, 18 months in her jersey and everything.
She's got her jersey going, man. She's good.
Not
good
even a cheerleader outfit, but a jersey. That's good. Teach them right.
Good
Joel, what's the record going on now between Georgia, Florida? What's the overall?
Let's see. Well, there's a controversy. I think it's 50 to 43. But I think the Gators call it 49 to 43 and 2. There were two ties back in the day when they had ties in the football game.
Are they allowing that to happen?
At the end of 4 quarters, if it's tied, there's no overtime. I don't know when overtime got instigated, but the Bulldogs hold the edge. But in the last 3,
it's been who?
The Gators.
It's
been the Gators.
It's been the Gators.
And so, and also look back, and a lot of Bulldog fans go into this game very worried because you can kind of wipe the slate clean. And the Gators have always had a knack for playing the Bulldogs well. In fact, a lot of fans out there will remember in the 2002, the Dogs went into the game in Jacksonville 8-0 and ranked number 4.
Sure
so,
thing.
You know, there's reason to have concern amongst the Dog Nation. This team, I think, is going to prepare and go into it a little bit differently, but you have to worry going to a neutral site.
Sure thing.
Going into Gator Nation, they'll bring their best. Hopefully not those uniforms that they wore last week.
Oh, I couldn't understand those. Those were, I guess they were supposed to be actual Gators. If you looked closely enough, I thought it was camo at first, but looks like they had the Gator swamp kind of attire. I can imagine that Kirby Smart is going to allow his players to come out in anything but a classic Georgia uniform. I don't think he's going to try and pull
the black.
I don't know.
The black?
I don't know if he'll go that. I haven't heard of anything. I think that would have been announced by now. But I don't think so. I think he is kind of a traditional guy in that sense, and he's going to keep the silver and black, silver and breeches out there and keep everything going.
Yeah, when the story about your team is mainly about your uniforms, you got a little bit of a problem going into the game. But the Gators are going to bring it. Not so great a year so far. The Gators are 3-3 overall. If you remember back to the first game of the season, it was Florida against Michigan. So, you know, that was a big game, and we find out later on in the season Michigan wasn't so great, but Michigan put it to the Gators 33-17 in the opening week of the season. So Florida's struggling a little bit. They've beaten Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. They lost 17-16 to LSU in a 2-point game. To Texas A&M,
sure thing.
Lost a 2-point game. So going into this game, Georgia and the prognosticators, I haven't looked at the point spread or what the odd favors are, but you got to feel like Georgia's going to be favored.
Sure thing.
Going to Jacksonville.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. Georgia will look to stay strong and get geared up towards the final. Obviously, once there are a few more games in the SEC. It's not over after Florida. So Kirby Smart will have them looking at this game, not past it, I'm sure. He'll have them focused, and the Georgia Gators hopefully won't know what hit them.
Well, we'll know, the keys to the game. If I'm Florida, I'm hoping my defense shows up and can put a little pressure stopping the running game. If you remember, Missouri did that in the early going. Georgia flipped to the passing game in the second half and eventually worked away from it. But Georgia's got to play turnover-free football, keep the penalties to a minimum.
Sure thing.
Get the running game going on offense, and that defensive backfield, the secondary, who's been a little bit exposed last week and the week before the bye week. You got to be a little concerned about what Florida may try to do. Florida's working. I think they're going to go with Felipe Franks, at the quarterback position for this game. And, you never know what Florida is going to pull out of the bag of tricks against Georgia in Jacksonville.
I think it's going to be a great game. I think Georgia will dominate, as you said. I think the defense will stifle Florida. I think there'll be a good amount of points on the defensive side. I think that will be a big key, that Georgia will score on the defensive side, not just on the offensive side.
Special teams could play a role in this game, whether it be a punt return, whether it be a muffed kick, whether it be a missed field goal, whether it be a kick return. I predict something's going to happen on neutral field that could have an impact on the game or positioning within the game. And, this game is not going to be over in the first quarter, that's for sure.
That's for certain. Well, you know what? I think we got to wrap it up for today. It's been a great discussion on DawgDial here. We have had some good talk about the bye week, the SEC standings, recruiting and injury, as well as answered some questions from our fans. Thank you for that support. Appreciate the Buffalo's Cafe Wingman questions that have come in. Next up, again, the Gators going to be a great game next week, 3:30 in the afternoon. I certainly look forward to watching that and coming to talk with you, Taco, on that. Let's remember that the executive producer of DawgDial is John Rawl. My co-host, Taco Thompson, thank you. Thank you to the fine staff here at Buffalo's Cafe for hosting us once again here in Woodstock. I'm Josh Mendlinger. Thank you for listening. DawgDial is a production of CRM Sports. For more info, visit crmsports.com. Go Dogs.